Raiders, explorers, traders, settlers. Few peoples in history have left a larger mark on the imagination. For more than 1,000 years, stories of longships, distant voyages, and fierce warriors have shaped how we think about the Viking Age. But where did the Viking people actually come from? Were they a single, pure northern population isolated in Scandinavia for thousands of years? Or is the genetic story far more complicated, shaped by migrations, mixing, and centuries of human movement? Scientists have been wrestling with this question for decades. And now, ancient DNA is finally giving us answers. Some of them are genuinely surprising. In this video, we're going to trace the genetic story of the Viking people. From the first hunter-gatherers who entered Scandinavia after the Ice Age, through the arrival of farmers and Bronze Age migrants, to the latest DNA discoveries that have transformed our understanding of who the Vikings really were. Today, when we think of Vikings, we usually think of the people of Scandinavia, especially modern Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Together, these countries are home to more than 20 million people. But the Viking legacy stretches far beyond northern Europe. During the Viking Age, roughly between 793 and 1066 AD, Scandinavian sailors reached places as distant as North America, the Middle East, and Central Asia. Their descendants can be found across Britain, Ireland, Iceland, Greenland, and beyond. That's not a small detail. It means the Viking story is not just a Scandinavian story. It's part of the genetic history of much of Europe. Geography played a huge role in shaping who the Vikings became. Scandinavia sits at the northern edge of Europe, surrounded by seas, mountains, forests, and long coastlines. That position encouraged both isolation and exploration. Communities could remain separated for generations, while skilled sailors connected distant regions through trade and migration. And here's what's interesting. Modern Scandinavians are often associated with traits such as tall stature, lighter hair, and lighter eye colors. While these features aren't unique to the region, genetics helps explain why some became relatively common there. We'll come back to that later. To understand Viking origins, we first need to look at language. The Viking people spoke Old Norse, a language belonging to the Germanic branch of the Indo-European language family. That immediately connects them to a vast network of peoples stretching across Europe and parts of Asia. In fact, the same ancient language family that eventually produced Old Norse also gave rise to English, German, Dutch, and even languages as distant as Persian and Hindi. Most people don't expect Vikings and ancient Indians to share linguistic roots, but deep in the past, their languages trace back to common ancestors. Language isn't DNA, of course. People can adopt new languages without major genetic change. But language often leaves clues about ancient migrations. And in the case of the Vikings, those clues point toward movements of people that transformed Europe thousands of years before the first longship ever set sail. But before we get to the DNA, we need to go back much further, to the people who were here first. Around 11,000 years ago, as the last ice age retreated, the first hunter-gatherers began moving into Scandinavia. The land they entered looked very different from today. Massive glacier had only recently disappeared, opening new territory for human settlement. Ancient DNA reveals something surprising about many of these early Europeans. Some had dark skin but light-colored eyes, including blue eyes. In other words, they didn't necessarily resemble modern northern Europeans. These hunter-gatherers lived by fishing, hunting seals, gathering plants, and following migrating animals. For thousands of years, they formed the foundation of human life in Scandinavia. Then came a second wave. Beginning around 6,000 years ago, Neolithic farmers expanded northward from populations ultimately connected to Anatolia, in present-day Turkey. They brought agriculture, domesticated animals, and entirely new ways of life. The arrival of farming wasn't simply a replacement of one population by another. Instead, scientists see evidence of mixing. Hunter-gatherers and farmers interacted, intermarried, and gradually created new communities. Scandinavia became a layered population rather than a single isolated group. Then came the third major wave. Around 5,000 years ago, Bronze Age migrants associated with the Yamnaya and related steppe cultures spread across Europe. Ancient DNA studies have shown that these steppe populations contributed significantly to the ancestry of many modern Europeans, including Scandinavians. These migrants likely helped spread Indo-European languages and introduced genetic lineages that remain common today. Some estimates suggest that steppe ancestry makes up a substantial portion of modern Scandinavian genetic heritage. One famous archaeological site that helps illuminate this era is the burial complex at Bor in Norway, where elite graves reveal connections across the wider Nordic world. By the beginning of the Viking Age, Scandinavia had become a true genetic mosaic. Hunter-gatherers, early farmers, and steppe migrants had all contributed pieces to the population that would eventually produce the Vikings. Now we arrive at the dramatic part of the story. For generations, many people imagined Vikings as a single, unified ethnic group. Their history books often portrayed them as a distinct northern population that expanded outward during the Viking Age. But when scientists looked at the DNA, they found something different. One of the most important studies came in 2020, when an international team led by researchers from the University of Copenhagen analyzed hundreds of Viking Age genomes published in the journal Nature. Their findings surprised many historians. Some Viking communities carried genetic ancestry from southern Europe. Others showed connections to populations from the British Isles and Eastern Europe. In other words, Viking identity wasn't based solely on genetics. People became Vikings through culture, language, trade, and participation in Viking society. The genetic evidence suggests that the Viking world was more diverse than many had imagined. The history books said Vikings spread outward and influenced others. But the DNA shows influence moved in both directions. Scandinavian populations absorbed ancestry from neighboring regions long before and during the Viking Age. Another dramatic chapter involves Iceland. When Norse settlers arrived in Iceland during the late 9th century, they didn't come alone. Genetic studies have shown that many of the women who helped establish Icelandic society likely had ancestry from Ireland and Scotland. This reflects the extensive Viking presence throughout the British Isles. That's a remarkable detail because it reveals how migration worked in reality. Populations mixed. Families formed across cultural boundaries. The Viking world connected people from distant regions. There were also periods of demographic hardship. Harsh climates, disease outbreaks, and geographic isolation created population bottlenecks in some northern communities. These events reduced genetic diversity and amplified certain inherited traits over time. And this is where it gets surprising. Some neighboring populations that seemed culturally distinct turned out to share substantial genetic overlap with Viking Age Scandinavians. The boundaries that appear clear on historical maps often look much blurrier in DNA. Researchers at institutions including the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology continue uncovering evidence that Viking Age Europe was highly interconnected. Trade routes carried silver, goods, ideas, and people across enormous distances. Through all of this, one theme remains constant. Survival. Kingdoms rose and fell. Wars erupted. Religions changed. Entire political systems transformed. Yet the descendants of these northern populations endured. Their identity adapted without disappearing. Their story continued, even as the world around them changed. So what does the DNA of modern Scandinavians actually look like? The answer is a blend of multiple ancestral layers. Most genetic studies find ancestry derived from ancient European hunter-gatherers, Neolithic farming populations connected to Anatolia, and Bronze Age steppe groups. Together, these components form the foundation of modern Scandinavian genetics. There is also regional variation. Norwegians, Swedes, and Danes share broad similarities, but differences exist. Coastal regions often reflect centuries of maritime contact. Northern populations may show additional influences linked to Arctic peoples. Island communities sometimes preserve unique genetic patterns due to isolation. Among Y chromosome lineages, haplogroups such as I1 and R1b are especially common in many Scandinavian populations. These paternal lineages trace different chapters of Europe's deep past and remain strongly associated with Northern Europe today. Perhaps the most important lesson is that the DNA challenges ideas of complete purity. The genetic history of the Vikings wasn't the story of a single untouched people. It was the story of mixing, migration, adaptation, and continuity. And that's the genetic story of the Viking people as far as science has taken us so far. Research from institutions such as the University of Copenhagen, the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, and many others is continuing to develop this picture with new ancient DNA being added regularly. When we look at the Vikings through genetics, something important becomes clear. DNA explains origins, but history explains strength. The people we call Vikings were not defined by a single ancestry. They emerged from thousands of years of migration, adaptation, and cultural change. What makes them remarkable isn't genetic purity. It's the ability of communities to survive, evolve, and leave a lasting mark on the world. Identity is not just about blood. It's about memory, community, and survival. The Viking people are living proof that identity is layered, ancient, and often surprising. Their genome tells one story. Their achievements tell another. Together, they reveal a human journey far richer than any simple origin myth. Now we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever taken a DNA test and discovered ancestry from Scandinavia or another unexpected region? And do you think the popular image of the Vikings holds up to what modern genetics is revealing? Share your stories and thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who love history, genetics, and the story of human origins. Don't forget to subscribe for more documentaries exploring the ancient DNA and genetic history of peoples from around the world. And if you know someone with Scandinavian roots, or someone who loves Viking history, share this video with them. If you have any questions or thoughts, leave them in the comments. Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.